The river was loud that afternoon, swollen with snowmelt and sunlight, and it was already too late by the time Rowan Hale understood that the woman being dragged under by the current was his boss. The water flashed silver and brown, the sky was painfully blue, and the scream that tore through the riverside park cut straight through his chest. Because some sounds do not belong to strangers and some moments refuse to wait for permission, Rowan ran before thinking, boots tearing at the mud, lungs burning with the kind of fear that only comes when you are a single father who cannot afford to die, yet cannot afford not to act. The river took Maribel Cross without mercy, and Rowan followed without hesitation, knowing only that if he did not reach her now, his son would grow up learning that courage had limits. If you believe stories about kindness, second chances, and ordinary people making impossible choices, please take a moment right now to comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Timeless Soul Story, because these stories live on only when they are passed from one heart to another. Rowan's life before that moment had been defined by careful lines he never crossed, days measured in shifts and school pickups, and a quiet promise to his 8-year-old son that he would always come home. He worked as a maintenance supervisor at Cross and Vale Logistics, a job that paid just enough and demanded everything else, and he kept his head down because stability mattered more than pride. Since his wife's sudden death 3 years earlier, daylight had become his only ally, because nights were long and filled with questions he could not answer. Daytime was when he could move, work, fix things, and pretend the weight on his chest was manageable. On that bright afternoon, the company had organized a team-building retreat by the river, a glossy idea that looked good in emails and terrible in reality. And Rowan had attended only because saying no was a luxury he did not have. Maribel Cross had always seemed untouchable to him, not because she was cold, but because she moved with the confidence of someone who had never had to calculate the cost of bread or child care. She was the CEO, the public face, the woman whose name was on the building and whose decisions rippled through hundreds of lives, including Rowan's. Yet she had been laughing that day, walking too close to the riverbank in soft shoes, distracted by a phone call and a life that had taught her the ground would always be solid. The slip was sudden, the fall ungraceful, and the water unforgiving. Rowan did not remember taking off his jacket or bracing himself. He remembered only the shock of cold, and the way the river tried to claim him as easily as it had claimed her. He reached Maribel with arms that shook and resolve that did not, fighting the current like a man who had already lost too much. The water slammed them against stones, dragged at their clothes, filled his ears with roaring that drowned out everything but the thud of his own heart. Rowan wrapped one arm around her and used the other to angle them toward a bend where the current softened, his muscles screaming in protest as he fought to keep her face above water. Time stretched and folded in on itself, and the sun watched without blinking as he pulled them inch by inch toward the shallows. When they finally collapsed onto the bank, the world felt impossibly quiet, as if even the river was stunned by what had almost happened. Maribel lay coughing and shivering, her hair plastered to her face, her expensive clothes ruined and heavy with water. Rowan's hands trembled as he checked that she was breathing steadily, that the wild panic in her eyes was giving way to awareness. He was soaked, scraped, and exhausted, but he did not feel heroic. He felt terrified by how close everything had come to ending. People began to gather, voices rising, phones appearing, and someone ran for help. But Rowan stayed where he was, anchoring the moment with his presence because leaving felt like tempting fate. The sun climbed higher, drying the edges of the world while the scent remained cold and fragile. The aftermath unfolded in fragments like scenes from a film spliced together without warning. Paramedics arrived and insisted on checks. Towels were wrapped around shoulders, and questions were asked that Rowan answered automatically. Maribel's hands would not stop shaking, and the shock had settled into her bones with a quiet violence that made her teeth chatter even in the warmth. It was then, in the strange calm that follows disaster, that she asked him to stay close while she changed out of her soaked clothes. Not as an invitation but as a plea for steadiness, because the water had stripped away more than fabric and left her feeling exposed to the world. Rowan understood immediately that this was not about desire or power, but about fear and survival. About a woman who had almost died needing to know that the man who saved her would not disappear the moment things became uncomfortable. He turned his back, offered his jacket, and stayed because leaving would have felt like abandoning someone in the aftermath of drowning. That choice, quiet and human, altered the trajectory of both their lives in ways neither could see yet. In the days that followed, the story spread through the company, gaining edges and losing truth, and Rowan found himself the subject of attention he had never sought. He returned to his routine with a new weight on his shoulders, worried that being seen would cost him the invisibility he relied on to survive. Maribel, on the other hand, faced a reckoning of her own. The river had taken her certainty and returned it cracked, and she began to notice the cracks in everything else, including the distance between her decisions and the people they affected. Daylight meetings felt different now, sharper and more urgent, and she could not shake the image of Rowan's determined face against the rushing water. Rowan struggled with the attention, with the sudden invitations to speak about bravery and values, because his bravery had been instinct, not philosophy. He was still the man who woke before dawn to pack lunches and fix leaky faucets, who counted every expense and worried about what would happen if he got sick. His son, Alaric, listened wide-eyed as Rowan explained why sometimes you help even when you are afraid, and those conversations stitched something new into Rowan's sense of himself. Yet there were challenges he could not talk about at home, like the way coworkers now watched him differently, or the way management whispered about promotions and public relations, or the fear that being elevated would pull him away from the life he had built so carefully. Maribel began to seek Rowan out during the day, not for grand gestures but for small truths. She asked about maintenance issues and listened to the answers, asked about his schedule and adjusted meetings to daylight hours so he could still pick up his son. And slowly, deliberately, she began to understand the company as a living organism rather than a set of numbers. This shift was not smooth or universally welcomed. Resistance rose from those who preferred the old ways, and Maribel faced criticism that she was letting emotion cloud her judgment. But the river had taught her that distance was an illusion, and that leadership without humanity was another kind of drowning. The tension between gratitude and propriety hovered around them, unspoken yet present, and Rowan navigated it with care. He refused special treatment, declined public praise, and focused on doing his job well, because integrity was the only currency he trusted. Still, change pressed in from all sides. An unexpected promotion came with flexible hours and a raise that lifted a constant pressure from his chest, and he accepted it not as a reward but as an opportunity to secure his son's future. The challenges did not vanish. Single parenthood remained relentless, grief still surfaced without warning, and the fear of losing what little stability he had kept him vigilant. As months passed, the story of the river settled into memory, and what remained was quieter and more profound. Maribel restructured company policies to support families, invested in safety and training that acknowledged real risks, and began to show up not as a symbol, but as a person. Rowan found his voice in meetings, learned to advocate without apology, and discovered that courage could be sustained, not just summoned in crisis. Daytime became not just a shield against loneliness, but a space for growth, for honest work done in the light where others could see and learn. Near the end of that year, on another bright afternoon by the same river, the company gathered again, not for spectacle but for reflection. The water flowed calmly, the sun warmed the grass, and Rowan stood with his son at his side, watching Maribel speak about change and responsibility. There was no drama, no grand confession, only a shared understanding that lives intersect in unexpected ways, and that staying in its many forms can be an act of profound respect. Rowan felt a quiet pride that had nothing to do with titles or praise, and everything to do with having chosen compassion when it mattered most. If this story has reached you, if it has stirred something gentle or brave inside your chest, please take a moment to engage with this video, because every like, share, and comment helps these stories find the people who need them. Special request before the ending. Please comment what this story made you feel, because your words keep this community alive. As the day faded into a soft, forgiving evening, Rowan realized that saving someone does not end at the riverbank, and that staying does not require spectacle or sacrifice beyond what love already asks of us. The river flowed on, indifferent and beautiful, but the lives it had touched moved forward with a little more care, a little more light, and the unshakable knowledge that kindness, once chosen, has a way of changing everything.